I always believed the boardroom was my battlefield, though no one else ever saw it that way. To them, it was mahogany tables, glass walls, and carefully poured water. To me, it was the place where fortunes lived or died, where alliances formed with a nod and collapsed with a glance. I thrived there because I understood that profit wasn't numbers on a spreadsheet. It was blood, and I'd been spilling it quietly for 36 years. My name is Raymond Kessler. I'm 61 years old, and until this morning, I was Executive Vice President of Strategic Operations at Dominion Global, a company I helped build from the ground up. You've probably never heard my name, and that's by design. I preferred it that way. Let the young faces smile in the press releases and pose on magazine covers. I was the one pulling the levers beneath the floorboards, generating 81% of Dominion's revenue year after year. No exaggeration. 8 out of every $10 that flowed into this empire came from channels I created, deals I secured, risks I calculated. So imagine the theater of it all when she walked in. Alexandra Marlowe, 34 years old, fresh from some Silicon Valley unicorn where disruption was a religion and gray hair was treated like a virus. She was appointed CEO 6 months ago, the board giddy at her age, her energy, her talk about the future. I could smell their fear underneath the celebration. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of missing out on whatever shiny new frontier she promised to conjure. This morning, she asked me to meet in her office. The blinds were half drawn, light slicing across the glass desk where she sat, posture perfect, expression carved from stone. She didn't waste time on small talk. Didn't thank me for 3 decades of carrying this company on my back. She simply slid a thick folder across the table toward me. Termination papers. "You're stuck in the past, Raymond," she said without looking up. Her voice was flat, practiced. "We need a leader who understands this new world." For a moment, I let silence fill the room. I studied the curve of her pen as it rested beside her hand, the faint scent of citrus perfume she favored, the way she avoided my eyes. I'd seen that look before, though not in boardrooms. It was the same look a man wears when he thinks he's holding the only weapon in the room. I smiled, reached for the folder, flipped through a few pages as though the words mattered. They didn't. Dominion's lawyers had made sure every clause was airtight. My fate, on paper, was sealed. She thought the paper was the weapon. She thought wrong. I closed the folder, stood slowly, and extended my hand. She hesitated for just a breath before taking it. Her palm was dry, grip firm. "I appreciate the clarity," I said. My tone was even, polite, nothing more than any dismissed executive might muster. I even gave her a nod, a little bow of respect. Let her believe she'd won. Then I walked out, not hurried, not sulking, calm, deliberate. The elevator ride down 38 floors felt like descending into another life. Colleagues passed me in the lobby, none aware that the man who kept their paychecks secure had just been cut loose. No farewell, no gold watch, no thank you banquet, just silence. And yet, I wasn't angry. Anger is sloppy. It blinds you. I was something colder, something sharper. Because Dominion Global wasn't just a company to me. It was a fortress I'd constructed stone by stone, a web of trade routes, secret partnerships, and buried leverage points. Every contract signed carried 2 meanings, the one they saw and the one only I knew. She thought firing me severed my influence. In truth, it unlocked everything I'd hidden beneath the surface. The kind of structures that don't collapse when you're pushed out. They ignite. I stepped into the street, sun glaring off steel towers, the city buzzing like an oblivious hive. I breathed once, deeply, and smiled again. They thought they'd fired me. What they didn't know is they'd just activated me. Most men measure their lives in promotions, titles, corner offices. Mine was measured in shadows. Dominion Global had been my cover for 36 years, but it was never just a company to me. It was the perfect mask. Every contract I signed, every merger I negotiated, every innovative strategy I pitched to the board was really a piece on a board far larger than they ever imagined. They thought I was an executive with a knack for squeezing profit out of stone. The truth was simpler and much more dangerous. I was an embedded strategist for a network that doesn't appear on any government ledger. Counterintelligence, domestic and foreign. Dominion was my stage, but the real play unfolded behind locked doors, in coded briefings, in transactions that never touched the daylight. I kept that other life buried under layers of routine. My colleagues saw me as reliable, predictable, maybe even dull. That was intentional. No one suspects the quiet man who always delivers, the one who never raises his voice in a meeting, who seems almost allergic to the spotlight. Behind that facade, every deal was a battlefield. Competitors weren't rivals. They were adversaries tied to cartels, syndicates, or hostile governments. A hostile takeover in Hong Kong wasn't about stock. It was about preventing a foreign power from embedding spyware in telecom satellites. The acquisition of a shipping line wasn't about profit margins. It was about securing safe lanes for the movement of intelligence assets. When Alexandra Marlowe slid those termination papers across the glass desk, she thought she'd ended my career. What she didn't understand was that she'd tripped a silent alarm. The moment her pen touched the dotted line, she signaled her allegiance to forces I'd been monitoring for years. And when I walked out with a smile, I wasn't retreating. I was returning home. My sanctuary sat behind the false wall of a storage unit 3 miles from Dominion's headquarters. From the outside, it looked like a rusting cube filled with boxes and dust. But if you pressed 2 fingers against the dent near the lock and keyed in the sequence, the wall shifted inward. Inside was a 12 by 12 war room, reinforced walls, soundproofing, a steel desk humming with encrypted drives and fiber-lined uplinks. 4 monitors glowed in the dim light, each tethered to private channels the public will never know exist. I sat down, breathed in the recycled air, and began pulling feeds. My network stretched through Dominion like veins, boardroom mics hidden in recessed lighting, hotel suite cameras disguised as smoke detectors, GPS trackers sewn into the lining of corporate jets. I'd spent years weaving the net so tight that nothing could happen without me hearing the echo. Her voice came through first, carried on the encrypted line from the executive floor. She wasn't speaking to the board. She wasn't speaking to staff. She was speaking in low tones to someone outside the building, outside the country. I scrubbed the feed back 30 seconds and ran it again. "Yes," she said, "the old man is gone. Tomorrow, we move the assets. No interference." My hand stilled on the mouse. Assets, not funds, not revenue. Assets. That word didn't belong to corporate finance. It belonged to the tradecraft I'd lived in for decades. Assets meant people, networks, operations. I launched a trace on the number she called, running it through one of the burner protocols I'd kept hidden for emergencies. The signal bounced 3 times before landing in Zurich, buried inside a shell company with ties to known laundering channels. The shareholders weren't investors. They were facilitators, their portfolios stacked with fronts that washed cartel cash and foreign government bribes. I recognized 2 of the names instantly. I'd chased them across 3 continents. Every time I thought I'd cornered them, They shifted into another identity, another corporation. And now, somehow, they had found their way into my company. The realization settled like ice in my chest. She hadn't fired me because she thought I was obsolete. She'd fired me because I was in the way. Dominion wasn't hers to lead, it was theirs to drain. She was a gatekeeper, a smiling mask on the face of an infection. On the feed, she laughed softly, nervous, but confident. "It'll be clean," she whispered. "No one will suspect a thing." I leaned back in my chair, watching her lips move on the muted video, hearing her voice through the separate channel. For 36 years, I had treated Dominion like a fortress. She thought she'd stolen the keys. What she didn't know was that I'd built a second set long ago. "Tomorrow," she promised. "Tomorrow, the assets move." I whispered the words into the quiet room, letting them settle like a target in my scope. Tomorrow. The first cracks appeared within 72 hours. The board, flush with self-congratulation after Alexandra's bold move, expected the machine to keep humming. They thought revenue was an automatic flow, a spring that never ran dry. What they didn't understand was that 81% of Dominion's lifeblood wasn't a system. It was me. I'd spent decades building channels so intricate that only I knew which levers to pull, which valves to tighten, which competitors to appease at the exact right moment. Remove me, and the current didn't just weaken, it seized. I heard the panic before I saw it. The audio feed from the 12th floor conference room, piped directly into my war room, caught the first whispers. "Quarterlies are down 12% already." Another voice, sharper, cutting through. "She said this wouldn't happen." She promised continuity. I smiled in the dim light, leaning back as I listened to men who once dismissed me as boring, now scramble like trapped animals. They had believed Alexandra's performance, her rehearsed confidence, her youth packaged as inevitability. But underneath the applause, fear was always waiting. Fear of losing what they didn't understand. I fed that fear, slowly, carefully. A market projection here, adjusted so it exaggerated losses. A forecast leaked to one director's private inbox, showing a collapse that hadn't yet materialized, but soon would. A copy of an algorithm, stripped of context, suggesting Dominion's prized predictive models, had been sabotaged. I knew exactly where to place the seeds. Each man watered them with his own paranoia. Within days, they no longer trusted her, and she knew it. The video feed from her office told me everything. She was still trying to perform the role of visionary, voice steady, posture perfect. But her eyes betrayed her. I've seen those eyes before. Not hers, specifically, but the same flicker of realization, the dawning recognition that control has slipped away. I'd seen it in war zones, in interrogation rooms, in the fleeting glance of a man who realizes the rifle aimed at his chest belongs to someone he thought was an ally. Uniforms change. The eyes don't. The memory hit me harder than expected. Afghanistan, 1993. A local commander we'd armed and trained sold us out to the highest bidder. His smile the night before was wide, genuine, practiced. The next morning, half our unit was dead in the dirt. I learned then that betrayal doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it's a handshake. Sometimes it's a promotion. Sometimes it's a folder slid across a desk. The tools change, but the hands are always the same. Greed, arrogance, the hunger to claim what someone else built. Dominion's board wasn't just a group of businessmen anymore. In my eyes, they were the same commanders, the same smug liars, dressed in suits instead of fatigues. And Alexandra was their latest mask. The difference was, this time, I wasn't in the dirt waiting for rescue. I was the one pulling the strings from the shadows. By the 5th day, the panic had grown teeth. The chairman himself, a man who once lectured me about vision, was now stammering into a call, demanding explanations. Our partners are nervous. The financiers are asking questions we can't answer. Alexandra tried to steady them, but the numbers I'd manipulated screamed louder than her reassurances. The market was bleeding, and the smell of it turned them against her. I didn't need to storm the building or raise my voice. I just needed to keep pressing small fractures until the whole structure groaned. They wanted tomorrow to arrive clean, with their new leader cemented in power. I wanted tomorrow too, but not for the same reasons. Because tomorrow wasn't about patience anymore. Tomorrow was about ignition. They thought they'd cleared the board, removed the obsolete piece, replaced it with something shiny and young. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning for this contingency longer than Alexandra had been alive. Every betrayal I'd endured had taught me the same lesson. Don't wait for the knife to sink in. Move first, move fast, move final. I closed the feeds one by one, the room falling into silence. The city outside hummed with oblivion, but inside I could hear the pulse of inevitability. They want tomorrow. So do I. But my tomorrow ends in fire. Dominion's glass tower loomed like a monument to hubris, 40 stories of steel and light slicing the sky. I had walked those halls as a loyal architect of its empire, but that night I walked them as something else entirely. Every step I took was deliberate, every movement practiced. I wasn't carrying a rifle, but the work was the same. Precision, patience, the slow assembly of inevitability. The building's security system recognized me as a ghost. I had built it that way years ago. Cameras blinked past my presence. Motion sensors skipped my shadow. No one ever asked why Dominion's flagship headquarters ran so smoothly, why no intrusion test ever revealed a vulnerability. Because there was no vulnerability for them. For me, there were dozens of doors, hidden corridors of code, and hardware only I knew existed. I started on the 24th floor, plugging a drive into a forgotten maintenance terminal. Malware flowed into the system like water, through cracks, invisible to any scan, coded to look like Dominion's own predictive software. Within minutes, it seeded itself into every executive presentation file, a phantom ready to twist charts and figures at my command. By morning, graphs would bend into nightmares, forecasts would collapse into smoke, and the board would see disaster wearing Alexandra's signature. From there, I climbed to the mechanical floor. The fire suppression system hissed quietly in the dark, a labyrinth of valves and ducts. I pulled a small panel aside and rerouted the lines, reversing pressure and locking override protocols. To an engineer, it would look like a fault. To me, it was a lever. A single keystroke later, foam and gas could blanket an entire floor, choking visibility and sowing panic. The elevators came next. Dominion's tower ran on speed and efficiency, its lifts gliding with clockwork elegance. I rewired the control subroutines, embedding a silent override that gave me full command. If anyone tried to flee, they would find themselves stalled between floors, trapped in glass boxes, suspended by cables I could cut with one line of code. Every step tightened the perimeter. Every keystroke was another round chambered. I didn't need a weapon in my hands. The building itself was my rifle. The systems, my bullets. By the time I reached the 38th floor, they were already gathering. Alexandra arrived first, sharp in her tailored suit, eyes bright with the arrogance of someone who believed she'd already won. With her came the financiers, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in the bland uniform of power, dark suits, polished shoes, accents shaped by privilege. I recognized two faces from dossiers buried in my archives. Shell company directors, launderers for governments who thrived on chaos. They weren't here to invest. They were here to own. Through the lens of a recessed camera, I watched them pour drinks. The suite was all glass and chrome, an aquarium perched above the city, every detail designed to scream wealth. They laughed like conquerors, voices muffled but gestures unmistakable. Alexandra laid out folders, her fingers dancing across charts I'd already poisoned with my malware. They nodded, smiling, already seeing themselves as the architects of Dominion's future. I settled in the adjacent boardroom, my sanctuary for the night. The blinds were drawn, the table long and empty, the silence thick. My laptop hummed with feeds from every angle. The suite, the elevators, the stairwells, even the garage below. My watch ticked faintly, synced to the triggers I'd set in place. Time stretched thin. Each movement in the suite carried the weight of a countdown. Alexandra's hand brushing the stem of her glass. A financier adjusting his cufflink. The flicker of the city lights beyond the windows. My pulse slowed instead of quickened. It was the calm before a shot, the stillness before fire. I leaned forward, fingers poised over the keys, and listened. Toasts were being raised. Glass chimed against glass. Alexandra's smile widened as she prepared to deliver her final words, a performance for her backers. The board was already assembled. The financiers were raising glasses. She was about to toast to my death. That's when I pulled the first trigger. The first trigger was digital, not physical. A single keystroke sent the malware surging through Dominion's systems like a vein of fire. The screens in the 38th floor suite flickered, their bright graphs twisting into blood-red cascades of falling numbers. Revenue projections inverted, profit curves shattered, and every presentation Alexandra had built to reassure her financiers collapsed into chaos. They leaned forward, confused, then alarmed, as data they thought they owned turned to ash in their hands. The second trigger drowned the suite in sound. Alarms shrieked as the fire suppression system roared to life, foam jetting from vents in the ceiling. Within seconds, the room looked like a blizzard had swallowed it whole. The financiers stumbled, coughing, their suits soaked, their smug confidence drowned in white haze. Alexandra shouted over the noise, but her voice was nothing more than a rasping echo against the panic. The third trigger sealed the exits. Elevators froze between floors, stairwell locks jammed tight. I watched them tug at the glass doors, pounding useless fists against a tower, designed to keep them in. They were fish in an aquarium, thrashing as the water drained away. I pressed on, methodical. Dominion's offshore accounts, the secret conduits Alexandra had funneled through Zurich, Singapore, and Panama, were already bleeding out. My code rerouted every cent into escrow accounts, flagged to international regulators. Evidence, perfectly packaged. Every shell company, every falsified invoice, every wire transfer tied to her name was now lit up like a runway in the dead of night. There would be no denying it, no spinning it away in a press release. Her empire was dissolving in real time. The collapse carried on encrypted feeds that I forwarded to the only allies I trusted. The board's panic was its own theater. On the 12th floor, the directors gathered for their scheduled call, unaware that their words were being piped live to investigators across the ocean. They shouted at each other, accusations flying, fear spilling out like blood. The documents I had leaked in pieces now snapped together in one merciless picture. They weren't visionaries. They were accomplices. Their signatures were fingerprints. Their votes were confessions. They didn't yet realize they were already under indictment. I saved her for last. When I entered the suite, The foam had begun to settle, clinging to glass walls like sea spray. The financiers were cowering in the corner, their eyes wide, their phones useless. Alexandra stood apart, drenched but defiant, her hands clenched into fists. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She looked at me with a hatred that burned hotter than fear. "You think this saves you?" She spat. Her voice was raw, stripped of the poise she wore like armor. "You're obsolete. You can't stop what's coming." I stepped closer until the reflection of her face trembled in the wet glass between us. "Obsolete doesn't bring down empires," I said. "It ends them." She tried to lift her chin, but her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of inevitability. I didn't raise a hand to her. I didn't need to. Death would have been a mercy. What I gave her was silence. Reputation obliterated, assets seized, allies dragged into custody by dawn. She would live with the ruin she created, her name chained to betrayal forever. When it was over, I walked the quiet halls, my footsteps echoing in the soaked marble. The city outside still glimmered, unaware that one of its towers had been gutted from the inside. I thought about the betrayals I had carried through deserts, through jungles, through boardrooms. None of it was new. Betrayal isn't unique to war zones or skyscrapers. Every empire falls from within. Revenge is nothing more than betrayal's echo, playing itself across centuries, in different tongues, in different currencies. Today, it was her. Tomorrow, it will be someone else. The faces change. The silence after never does. At dawn, I signed the last document in the war room, transferring Dominion back into stabilizing control. No press conference, no applause. Just ink on paper, the sound of a gavel in my own mind. They fired me. I terminated them.